problem with our own movements. Now, you may say, well, what do you mean our own movements? I'm talking about independent media. There are problems within independent media, and we need to address them. It's not just, okay, they're advertising products here, they're pushing left versus right paradigm here, they're trying to play the game of what clickbait works better and what fear-mongering works better. None of that. I actually respect independent media for the most part because they're an alternative to the mainstream media. So I have less to complain about and more to say, hey, good job, keep up what you're doing. That being said, there's a lot of resources that independent media has, and they share with people, and they come of great use, especially at first. But there's no binding resource. There's no binding source that they all basically come down to. You may say they have a binding idea, but they don't always really grasp onto those ideas. For example, many independent media want freedom, right? That's the whole reason why they're independent media. A lot of them talk about freedom. But when it comes to talking about freedom, they may talk about it in the left versus right way versus another community like the one I'm in that talks about it in a natural law sense. So you have two different communities that want the same thing, but have different means of getting there, essentially. And what I'm saying is, ideally, if we're independent media, we have this ability to speak with one another, we're not corporately bought out, we should reason with one another as to finding a binding message, a binding use, a binding resource, because together is more powerful than separate. And instead of having our own echo chambers here and there, even within independent media, even though we all share the same goals and desires, without that division, we can have a lot more unity if we focus on those ideas such as freedom and perhaps get closer as to what it actually entails, what is actually required for that freedom. Okay, so I may have a really hardline stance when it comes to this, like, hey, we need a movement. Not a lot of people are willing to make this hardline stance and say, we need a movement with a flag, with logos, with symbology, with you can even make your own, and as long as we all share the same resources, we can make a difference. But me saying that, I understand the implications of that, and the expectations, and also the speculations about that, right? And I've made many videos about this in time, but I wanted to do a sit-down video and talk a little bit about it. I'm not going to go too deep into it, but it's important to realize that yes, I may have a hardline stance on, like, this is the action that we need to do, but that's likely because most of independent media is not. And therefore, the change that they want to see, being that it's not, nothing's really changing in actuality, I see that there needs to be a different type of change. And then I also look at the past, and I look at all the movements of the past, how movements were necessary to change things. So there's not a great conversation about movements, nonetheless conversation about action, and that's all the least of what I'm asking for of independent media. Rather than focusing on politics and what rises to the top, what foam rises to the top of the cup, because that's what they're doing often when it comes to the headlines and catchy subjects. And unfortunately, my videos that talk about the current day problems of the world will get more views than my ones that talk about philosophy. Though, I will say, philosophy has a lot of problems too. And I'd rather not talk about philosophy on this channel, I'd rather talk about action. I'd rather talk about action, period, because that's all that is necessary. And rather than speculating all day, because there's people who sit in Discord rooms for hours on end just talking to each other about philosophy, and even though they all agree on the same thing, it's just pointless. We need to talk about action. And I don't see that often within independent media, and I haven't seen it for a long time. So I have to give great credit to the Conscious Resistance, because they're the only independent media organization that I've seen, personally, that has actually tried to do something. It says, hey, okay, here's all our resources. Let's do a tour around the country. Let's set up, places where we can meet up with people. We can teach them how to do tech. We can teach them how to do that. We can encourage them to be a leader. And we're going to show them resources so they can make their own content. They're emphasizing the individual doing the work that needs to be done, which Mark Pastio calls the one great work, right? And he's been doing a lot of emphasis on action too lately, for great reason, because now is the time to do it. And of course, it's always the time to do it. There's always a time to spread the truth. And I'm not saying that independent media that doesn't talk about this particular type of action is not doing any type of action, because, well, just by simply giving people knowledge, people will do certain actions, and people will be more likely to make the better actions that are necessary for the desired world and understand their world better, etc. What I'm saying is that there are requirements for the exact world that we desire, such as that of freedom, and understanding what freedom is. How much within independent media do we hear the word statism alone? Maybe in the Conscious Resistance, maybe in Mark Passio's network, Larkin Rose, but outside of that, even though a lot of these individuals have spread elsewhere, there's not a great focus on that. And we lack a central, unifying, understandable message that says, well, hey, if we're all part of this, we amplify our numbers already by the millions. Because that's what would happen if we brought the independent media essentially together and unified them, which is why I've talked about it a lot on my channel. And I'm willing to talk about it with any of them. You know, I've actually sent out emails to a bunch of people. I've contacted almost every single independent media organization that I could get my hands on, or at least most of them, like I said. And I try writing all these big things personalized for each and every single one of them. I even send them materials sometimes, right, if they have a P.O. box. And I try my best to reach out and say, well, what about this? What about that? What are your thoughts on that? And I don't really get anything back. And when they're sitting down in interviews, the people who interviewed them, they're like, okay, let's talk about philosophy. Let's talk about this idea, that idea. What's going on in the world? Okay, maybe they'll go into alternative currency, right? Because a lot of people like talking about Bitcoin. Oh, the blockchain, it's going to save us from everything. And then there's going to be people who talk about, oh, just homestead, just go off the grid. It'll help us and just bring and raise children. And then if we raise enough children, we can end the system. It's like, I'm sorry, but it's not practical. It's not what's really going to change things. And the reality is it needs to be some sort of movement. Unless it's a movement, it's just not going to be impactful. Now, if you disagree with me on that, thank the heavens, because I want people to talk about this, at least, and share their ideas, share their disputes, share where they agree, and say, well, what is the blueprint to action when it means the aggregate with all of us? Because that is necessary for this way of action, even if that action is just teaching people, because it is essentially that. And that's why I created Nature's the Answer as an educative movement. The idea, nature, being the answer across natural law, natural medicine, natural rights, natural leadership, all sorts of different things. And even, you can go as too far as religion, but people agree that nature is this great source and that they connect with it and they think it's beautiful. And I say, well, let's take it to the full extent. Let's understand it in all ways. If you understand that, you're born perfectly and you don't need a bunch of things to impair you and make you better because man thinks that you need it to make you perfect, that there is this no such thing as this man-made perfect, that you are actually pretty darn beautiful in your orderly way, that there's intelligence within the universe and within your body. It's an inspiring, it's an empowering thing that when taught to people, when realized, it is something that is with them till the end. And people make video content channels like this, going into rants like I'm doing right now, talking about how amazing that is. But one other problem that I see as well is, aside from my hardline stance on okay, we need this, and the fact that I think a lot of people can use a hardline stance on that as well when it comes to action, not just ideas, because everybody's stuck in, their echo chambers. In fact, their ideas should be more open and their actions should be more direct, I would argue. And that means that they shouldn't limit their ideologies to, let's just use natural law terminology. Let's just use moral objectivity. Let's just tell everybody that right and wrong is objective and therefore it's settled. You have to use perspective. And I've been emphasizing this a lot. I'm saying that natural law, the ability of which is reason, so you have to reason with people. It requires work. You can't just give blanket statements. You can't just say this is what it is, accept it, otherwise I'm done with you and I'm going to rage and I'm going to quit. No, there is a level of reason involved. If you are a teacher, if you're somebody who aspires to change, there is a level of work involved. It is. And so there's terminology as well, like I said, that people will use, and they'll replicate it across their own platform. So people will make presentations that look exactly like other people's presentations, use words that look exactly like others, and don't, I'm a culprit to that too, of course, because I made a seminar called Unnatural Law Seminar, which is obviously an influence from Mark Passio's Natural Law Seminar. But I did that on purpose to provide a different perspective, and it challenged my own belief systems many times over to realize the information of natural law. So looking at things through different perspectives always helps, and if you're just taking certain knowledge and putting it in different formats, okay, great, that works too, because how many formats could you possibly put certain types of knowledge? Well, you can actually put it in a lot of formats, and the point is that I want you to have your own creative spark, your own creative flair. If you don't add that, then you're basically not human anymore. You're just a robot, even if you're just following orders for something that doesn't seem like you're following orders for, would help people break their own orders. See, you have to be the change, basically literally, as in saying that you can also think for yourself, even if you're understanding concepts that other people share. Right? I make my own philosophies on this channel all the time, just to show as an example, basically, of that creativity. Without creativity, there cannot be a movement. Without moving, which requires some sort of change, some sort of motion, there is no movement. There needs to be some sort of action being committed that causes a consistent change, right? So you got to find that for yourself. I can't tell you what that is, but it's a creative pursuit, whether that's art, cooking, who knows what. But a lot of people have done that with natural law, and I applaud you if you have. Now, looking at it on the side of movements, well, okay, what could you do with your art? What could you do with your cooking? You can share, certain words, certain websites like the one I created to help bring people to the same knowledge so they can learn more as to what you did, and everybody can essentially come together on that. So I'm all about bringing people together. Just that too is very, very powerful. I've talked about that. Real life activism is just not limited to protest, right? We should know this. This is not something we really worry about in independent media, because let's face it, independent media is basically online. Even though they say technology is like gonna destroy the world, basically, and most people see it as inevitable, I don't want us to think that it's inevitable, because if we can end the power systems that be, we don't have to worry about technocracy and robots taking over the world necessarily, because people are free, and therefore there's more knowledge and there's more innovation, there's more products, and you don't have certain select few companies taking control of everything and corporations, because, well, there's a lot of competition in such a world. Like I said, I got to give credit to the Conscious Resistance for doing that of which I don't see the other independent media doing. That being said, they should not be secluded in their ranks and just say, this is freedom cells, we're not open to, let's unite all of independent media, let's make this our message. Freedom Cells has its problems too. I actually have a whole page and resources dedicated to why Freedom Cells is incomplete. See, it's not that it's bad. Obviously, it has great benefit. It's incomplete because it only has networking, and it misses the two other aspects I mentioned, which is education and representation. It doesn't have a central idea to say, this is what we're educating people on. When I say nature is the answer, I'm saying nature, let's learn from it. And when I use symbology and I say, here's the flag, I'm using representation, right? Something the Common Law Assembly does a very good job with is at least they have all three. They really do, and why I think they can grow quite a bit, and because they're changing people's perceptions entirely with all three. They have education, great networking, and a flag of their own, like the one I have in the fridge. So I'm proud to represent any movement that has these components, because they really see them as essential, and in addition to that, they're open to philosophies such as natural law. That being said, may they still be talking about statism and what to do within the system? Well, it's debatable. It depends. Everybody's going to have their own views. There's going to be many people within movements with their own views. That should be natural. But again, if the general root is we want freedom, we want to get away from the system, that's it. Unite on that. Take that to home. And then bring your other ideas into it. introduce proposals, write up documents. You're going to feel inspired to want to, out of moral obligation, fill the gaps where you see they must be filled. Like when I see people talking about moral objectivity and subjectivity and causing these fights with each other, I'm like, well, okay, maybe I can deliver a different perspective on both sides. I could say, well, maybe they're both right and they're both wrong, because they are. And it's just usually a matter of perspective. And so, like I said, I've contacted many people in independent media, and for the most part, I've been ignored. Another thing, too, is when it comes to veganism. There's a lot of ignorance on that when it comes to the natural law community or other communities in general. Let's not talk about health. Let's not talk about this. Since when is anything off limits, first of all? Number two, veganism is something that affects people a lot, and it can affect their mind and the way they think about the world. So when I introduce a different view of veganism, even though a lot of people disagree with me in this community, who's willing to step up to the plate and say, am I going to consider these ideas and talk about them, and maybe even compare and contrast, or come up with my own view of this based on my own understanding of natural law as well? Because that's what I did. I'm not willing, I'm not, I'm not fearful to speak up about anything and everything and say, this is, yes, my view on this perspective. And say that, yes, there are views of my own that I'm going to have on this perspective. We all do, whether we admit to or not. That doesn't mean we don't agree or that we do agree. We have a perspective, right? You see everything through a different lens, even if you agree that that is a pillow, that is a desk, that is a camera, right? We look at that and we all think different things about it often. We may identify it the same way, but the way we use it and the way we apply it is very different, perhaps. So this is just an example of perspective. And so another thing too is I was kicked off of Discord. I was kicked off of Linktree, right? And a lot of people will still use Linktree, still use Discord. Communities will still negotiate through there. It's like, was I not warning you? Was I not talking about where we should move because of what happened to me? Do we not take these as warnings? I mean, this is just the sign of the disconnectedness within the communities. There needs to be that openness and that communication and that networking if we're really going to succeed. Because let's face it, the political parties and these people that run these massive campaigns have great networking abilities, and they're constantly in touch with each other. In fact, so much to the point where, again, it's just over-pressuring. And we don't want to be pressuring, but at the least we want to be directed. Okay, so it's like, you got to find a balance, of course, between action and non-action, just as the Tao Te Ching talks about, and you got to know their righteous placement. Same thing with individual action and collective action. Same thing when it comes to all the things that I just mentioned. There's a balance to be found, and then some people may even say, well, there's no such thing as balance, but everything essentially strives toward an optimum, toward a sustainable, and that's what I mean by a balance, per se, is realizing, what things are supposed to be, where they're supposed to be, and understanding how this world is basically created, how it's manifest. And by doing so, we also understand action. So let's not forget that when we talk about philosophies, we do just forget about action. And let's not forget that independent media should not just be talking about what's going on in the news, but actually talk about action. And let's not forget they shouldn't be talking about individual action, they should also be talking about collective action. Thank you very much for listening. I hope some of these things kind of clear up some perspectives. I think it is saddening to see ignorance in part of these communities, and these are the problems that I see in particular. Of course, you can say there's ego, there's identity, but that's everywhere. It's always going to happen. And generally, there's always going to be people that speak up. There's going to be karma that happens, so you don't really have to worry as much. Most importantly is that what we're doing we know is going to benefit the world. No doubt what we're doing is going to benefit the world. Slowly but surely it can, even if we're not doing exactly everything I say. But it's important that we do some of the things, or consider some of the things that I am saying about movements, because if we learn from the past and we read a lot of books about it and we study how action works. We need to have numbers of people, and we need to share the same message. We need to say, this is where we stand, and this is why, and if you agree, great. We're not asking for, if you want to agree with us or not, it's your choice. But that's the thing. We simply want choice. We simply want the ability, the simple things, the simplistics. So past philosophy and into the simplicity. Thank you very much. Corey Mengelat, Nature is the Answer. Learn more about modern slavery in my book, Slavery Gone for Good. My name is Corey Engelat. I want you to reclaim your freedom by knowing what slavery is, so we can end slavery once and for all.